So that is kind of what I'm mostly doing to practice the jump entry. Here you can see the comparison. It's like very similar, as you can see the way that you jump and you turn around the foot that will support you. Hi fellow inline pilots, welcome to the channel and welcome to part 3 of the Beginner to Powerslide series. And in this part I am going to focus on one of the entries from forwards to backwards into the Powerslide. And this entry is called the jump entry, or at least that's how I call it. And in this way you kind of jump from forwards to backwards and changed your following leg from forwards to backwards and the leading leg into a slide, sort of in the air, and then when you land you are perfectly positioned to do a power slide. So this is kind of a useful way of getting into the power slides for several reasons. Well, first of all, it's kind of like the same movement and in any speed, and especially I wanted to have a braking method which works at any speed. And yeah, if you like jump up and you do your change of position in the air, it doesn't matter how fast you're going, because in the air you're not touching the ground anyway. At least that's the theory, and therefore it doesn't matter how fast you go, you can always do the same motion. And that was kind of the reason for me to practice this, to focus on this mainly. Another reason is that it allows you to keep a very narrow path when you're changing into the power slide, and I want to be able to do it like maybe on the street where there might be other traffic next to me. I still want to be going into a braking method that gives me a good stopping power, but without needing a lot of space, or maybe getting into the space of other road traffic. So I think this is one of the main ways to do it, to just turn around in the air and go straight into the power slide. And that's also another advantage, is like you just keep going straight. You follow the same line after you get into the slide as where you were going before you got into the slide. And also I find that compared to the main other technique, which is using a lunge turn, I find it easier to bail out if you find that maybe the road has a bit more friction. Of course, in many cases it might be too late, but sometimes you can feel that the friction is too much and just go into a backwards rolling position and continue without falling sideways. Another important advantage that I found out later, that I'm going to discuss later in this video, is that it's actually possible to practice this transition without actually sliding. So that's kind of an advantage for several reasons. Of course, there are also disadvantages to this method, to the jump entry, which is, for instance, well, when you're in the air, you don't have control anymore. You kind of like, you just have to hope that you land in the way that you expect it to. But you can't do anything in between, like letting go of the ground and touching down again. And that is a bit scary and maybe also a bit tricky and can be dangerous, especially if there's wind or something and you don't want to be blown over before you get back into the ground. But of course, if you practice it more, you can keep this jump shorter and shorter and reduce that risk. Another disadvantage I find, especially in the beginning when you're still learning it, is that well, you're higher up when you're jumping, so you might also fall down further. That's a bit of a risk. So you can fall harder in this jump entry than using the lunge entry. And also the problem is that when you go down and you hit the ground again, there's a risk that you put your legs down too much and then you land with your sliding leg too high, because you're maybe nervous and you want to like get back to the ground as soon as possible, but then you don't drop down far enough to get into a slide. So that's another risk that I find, particularly with the jump entry. So instead of doing a jump entry, another way to change your foot backwards is to do a Mohawk transition, where you just flip your foot, the back foot first backwards, and then after you did that, then you lift up the front foot and make the sliding motion. And that works good at lower speeds, because a Mohawk transition works well at lower speeds, but at high speeds, since most people like me cannot put their feet apart 180 degrees, I cannot put my one foot backwards and the other foot cannot keep going forwards with the other foot at the same time. So there's always a short time before lifting up the front foot where I'm going kind of in a turn very shortly. And as long as you do it fast enough and you're not going too fast, then it's not a problem. But at high speeds, the Mohawk transition therefore becomes a bit unstable, and it's not recommended to do that at high speeds. Therefore, I didn't learn the transition into the Powerslide with the Mohawk, because I want to have a braking method that works at high speed. There's no point learning the Mohawk transition from that kind of, the way I thought about it is, like, what's the point? I just want to have something that I'm sure will work after I learned it at high speeds. So that's why I didn't really focus on that. So the other method for getting into the Powerslide that is very common is the lunge turn entry. So this works by first turning into a lunge turn, kind of using one foot as a pivot to swing the other foot around. And actually it took me a long time before I found how to do it, and I will discuss this in the next episode. This episode is about jump entry, but let me first kind of compare the two. So for the lunge entry, the advantages that I see are mostly that you keep low all the time. So from start to finish, you can always keep low. So it's safer. You cannot fall down very far if you fall down, and you also never lose contact with the ground, which is kind of feels a lot more safe. And also, maybe it's not very useful. It's not maybe so important, but I find it quite a nice movement. I really like it because it fits into a skate flow where you flow without leaving the ground, without lifting any foot off the ground. You can really flow smoothly into a Powerslide, and that's really nice. It's really a lot of fun. I find it more fun actually than the jump entry. But one of the downsides is that you have to swing out one leg, unless if you're very good, you can maybe swing it out less, but especially if you're beginning, you have to kind of put your leg as low as you want to be in slide already when you swing your leg 90 degrees before you get into the full 180 degree turn, because otherwise you might not break free and you might get stuck on the ground and the foot grabs, and you actually, instead of sliding, you turn all the way over, and then you get into a spin, or you turn sideways onto the road, which can be very dangerous. If there's traffic, you don't want to go sideways. So yeah, that's really big downside. And another downside is that, as I'm going to discuss later, I can practice the jump entry without sliding, but I don't know any way, maybe there is one, but I don't know it, a way of practicing the lunge turn Powerslide without sliding. So it always requires sliding, and so there's no way to do a lot of practice without destroying your wheels or finding a place where you can have a smooth ground and don't have so much wheel wear. So yeah, that's one of the downsides as well. The first thing I did in order to learn the jump entry Powerslide was to learn how to do a jump transition. So yeah, there's not much to say about it. You just have to practice it over and over again, and you can do it do a couple of them in a row by jumping back forwards and then backwards and then forwards. And it's just a matter of getting used to it, just doing your repetitions over and over again. And it takes a long time. For me, it took a long time to get it comfortable. I could do it quite early already in my skating progression, but to actually do it without losing my balance or being afraid of falling, it took maybe half a year at least from starting to do the transition to actually feeling more comfortable doing it. Also at higher speeds, maybe it took even longer than that. So this is something that requires some patience. And even once you learned that, you can actually already do a power slide by doing first a jump transition from forwards to backwards, and then doing a slide separately. So it's kind of a win-win situation. You actually, by doing the forwards to backwards, you actually can already do a power slide. Practically, you can actually already use a power slide in practice. And of course, you're not as quick as when you go straight into the power slide, so you lose a bit of time. But at least it may save you in some situations already. And then you also have the preparation to learn the jump entry after that. One way to practice the jump entry power slide, of course, is to kind of try to repeat it as much as possible. After you learn kind of how to do it first, then you can just like start doing over and over in a repetition to get better at it. But there are several issues that you might run up against that make this either impossible or very difficult to do in practice, because when you start out, you're not low enough usually to actually get into a slide on a normal road surface. So you have to first of all maybe find a space like I found this garage, where the floor is so smooth that I can slide even before going low enough for doing a slide outside. If I do this outside, I wouldn't be able to slide because I'm not going low enough in this video. So there would be no way to practice it unless in this garage or some other space where I got a smooth floor with a little bit of dust actually, that makes it slidable easier. Another problem is that even if you can do a low slide, then if you practice it enough to actually learn it, you might have to buy many new sets of wheels, because you're just destroying so quickly your wheels, and that will be a very expensive training, because wheels can be maybe from anywhere between 50 euros for a set of wheels to up above 100 euros, and you might need new wheels every couple of weeks. I don't know, depending on how many times you practice. So that's another problem. So therefore I was looking for ways to practice the power slide without actually sliding. The first thing I tried to learn the jump entry without sliding was to actually do something more complicated. I tried to jump onto one foot, because my thinking was, well, if I can learn to do a jump entry onto one foot, it's more difficult than a power slide, because you have to not just turn around on one foot, but you actually have to balance on one foot as well after that. You don't have the other foot to kind of keep yourself from falling one way. So I thought, well, if I practice learning jumping onto one foot backwards, since it's more difficult, if I can do that, then after that I can probably do a power slide, a jump entry very easily. And it took me quite a long time before I was comfortable doing a jump entry outside. I first started learning it inside in the living room actually, with a couch next to it, so if I would fall, I wouldn't fall very hard. And yeah, it's a bit difficult. You have to, like, normally when you jump, the way you put your feet One, it's kind of dividing the weight, but in jump entry onto one foot, you have to put your foot much further forwards, the back foot, than you think in the beginning. Anyway, so I started practicing that, and then there were two downsides to this. One is that it took a long time before becoming comfortable with it, and actually I'm still learning, and I'm still doing it for, like, I like to do it for other reasons. I can use the skill for other things later. But still, after 1.5 years of trying this, repeating it thousands of times, probably, I'm still not comfortable doing it at a high speed. Plus, the other downside is that it doesn't seem to be giving me like a lot of skills I need for doing the jump entry Powerslide, because the balance is completely different. So it's kind of a bit of a waste of time in that sense. I've been like practicing this very complicated skill in order to learn the jump entry to the Powerslide, and actually doesn't help much for learning the jump entry. So I can't really recommend learning this unless you really like to learn it anyway. It probably helped me a little bit for doing the jump entry Powerslide, but not as a complete replacement of doing the Powerslide jump entry as it by itself. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Maybe don't waste your time on this. So a better way to learn the jump entry Powerslide without actually sliding is to do a forwards to backwards jumping transition, while instead of dropping down on both feet flat, you drop down on the following foot flat, but the leading foot, which normally would be going into a slide, in a Powerslide, you land on the front wheel, the toe wheel. The nice thing about the way that it works is that landing on your toe wheel, usually you cannot put all your weight on there, so you're kind of forced to put less weight on that toe rolling foot, which is exactly what you want for the Powerslide. You want most of your weight onto the following foot, the rolling foot, and much less weight on the sliding foot, so you can slide much better on a rough surface. And somehow it kind of works out very well. If you do the toe roll, then the weight distribution becomes quite similar to that for a Powerslide. And the other advantage is that you can actually keep repeating it in one go. You don't have to stop. You can just keep going back and forth into the backwards toe roll, going back forwards normally, then going back into the toe roll backwards over and over again. So you can really multiply your repetitions, and it's also much less tiring because you're not braking and then accelerating again and again after every try. Actually, it took me a long time before I figured out that this is a good way to learn the jump entry. But actually, I had watched a video of Skate Fresh Asha before I started doing this, and it was about doing the jump entry Powerslide. And actually, I hadn't noticed that she was recommending also this to do this, but it was a very short part of the video. When I watched that video later again, I realized that she had actually recommended doing this, but I just didn't know, and I just found it out by myself. But I mean, maybe I should have paid more attention to her video. Anyway, so that is kind of what I'm mostly doing to practice the jump entry. Here you can see the comparison. It's like very similar, as you can see. The way that you jump and you turn around the foot that will support you. So it's very good to practice this backwards turnaround of the following foot, the supporting foot. Even though you're not practicing the sliding, but you can because you kind of you have to learn two things at the same time. Learning to flip around one foot and learning to slide the other one. But if you're like me, I cannot really learn two things at the same time that are different for both feet. I really have to find a way to focus on one at a time, learn that one, get it out of my mind, get it into my muscle memory. That, like in this case, the flipping one foot backwards, you have to really learn it to do it without thinking about it anymore. And then, after that, you can focus on the sliding foot, which is actually where I think most of our focus needs to be when doing the power slide, because you have to adapt your angle to the road surface. So it's better to focus on your sliding foot instead of focusing on your backwards rolling foot. And with this way of transitioning with the toe roll, you can really get this backwards flip of the rolling, the supporting foot, into your muscle memory by repeating it over and over again. And then only after that you can focus on sliding. And that's also possible because you can, when you do it a toe roll, you can always go into to a slide whenever you want in this method. So I really like this way of learning the jump entry a lot. In order to do a forwards to backwards jump onto a toe roll, of course you have to be able to control your direction on the backwards toe roll. And I don't think it's very easy, but also I have a tendency to make things more complicated than they need to be, so maybe that's just because of that. But the way I learned it was it's a bit like a detour, but so what I wanted to do is learn a backwards to forwards inverted Mohawk transition. And the reason I wanted to learn it is because I was doing lunge turn power slide, and I was ending up backwards quite a lot. And if you're like doing the lunge turn entry of the power slide, it's really a nice flow. But then having to turn back forwards, I didn't know any way to turn back forwards without losing the flow, because I had to step over when doing the normal Mohawk transition, and it didn't feel like very nice. So I was looking at other people doing this, and I thought, hey, that's what I need. I want to learn this. So I started learning this way to turn back forwards again. So yeah, that was quite successful. But then I actually wanted to have a little bit more skills, because I saw that other people were doing the inverted Mohawk transition on their like toes instead of doing a flat-footed drag, and I thought, hey, it looked quite nice. I wanted to learn that as well. And although this one I learned kind of, sort of quite easy, more easy than I thought. I didn't fall down much learning it, but then when I wanted to add the toe roll to it, I suddenly had a lot of difficulty, because I just didn't know how to control the toe direction, especially going backwards, which is also needed. So this is kind of what I wanted to do, and it kind of looks much nicer than the other version, where you drag your foot, or you flip around on the heel. So this is kind of like a drag, but you can also flip around on the heel. But then when you do the toe, you actually go backwards first with on the toe wheel, then turn out, and then let the other foot catch up. And then after that you roll back in on the toe roll forwards in order to complete the transition. So yeah, it took me quite some effort to learn it. As you can see, it didn't go very smooth in the beginning, so I had some trouble just because I already learned a lot, a long time for the other one transition, and didn't cause a lot of trouble for me. But then suddenly when I started to introduce the toe roll, I kind of had some issues, and then finally I did it. I completed the whole movement, and then I fell down because I was focusing so much on my feet. I couldn't also focus on my balance. So anyway, this is a success. This is one of the first time I completed the movement. But yeah, it didn't end up exactly as I wanted. So yeah, that's how I learned my toe rolling. So I really can't say how it would have been if I just learned the toe roll by itself. But in this case, doing it like this, it took me quite a long time to get it right. Like after this, I still practiced many months before I could do like the smooth version. I guess you could just learn the backwards toe roll by just rolling backwards and kind of lifting up your heel. But I always like to learn like other fun things at the same time, if I can, just to stack up functions and to learn something that is not just functional, but actually is also something that is fun to do. Something that's easier than the inverted Mohawk transition is called the backwards toe compass, or the backwards toe roll pivot. I'm not sure what's the best name. And you can learn that by going backwards in circle using crossovers, and then trying to curve your inside foot, the leading foot, inside more and in a sharper turn, and then trying to get the other foot to roll around it. And then it's kind of like you're putting one foot, you're fixing one foot on the ground as a compass needle, and then moving around with the other foot. There are two difficulties in this. One is that you have to put some weight on the compass, the tip, the pivoting foot. Otherwise, if you don't put any weight on it, it will just drag along, or it may be actually lift off the ground, and you won't go into a sharper turn. It will just continue with the outside foot in the same direction, so nothing basically happens. The other problem I had is that if I try to turn out one foot, the toe rolling foot, it would skip on the ground instead of locking into position, and still it wouldn't give me the rotational movement. So I found out actually I had to not just turn out on the backwards toe roll, but turn out on the outside edge of the toe wheel. And yeah, I wasn't really used to doing a lot of outside edge movements anyway, so it was a bit of getting used to. But you can practice it smoothly, like slowly, and kind of gradually get into it. So now I will show that actually I could have done this instead of learning the backwards to forwards inverted Mohawk toe roll version, because actually this compass, if you do it very small, it actually becomes an inverted Mohawk already. So as you can see, the beginning is very similar, but then you immediately go into the transition where you let the other foot follow again. So yeah, that's another way to learn the backwards toe roll, which is some way to also learn something fun at the same time. Something else I need to mention is that my arms are not really doing much most of the time with these complicated exercises. They look like kind of zombie arms when I'm doing very complicated motions with my feet and trying to learn something. Sometimes my arms just hang around doing nothing, and or my hand is twitching the way my foot is moving. I don't know what it is. I can't really do both things at the same time. Maybe once I learn the feet, then I can still use my arms to do it better later. But while I'm learning something with my feet, usually I don't really have much function of my arms anymore. So please don't pay attention to what I'm doing with my arms. If you want to know how to improve your learning or your skills with balance and use your arms, look at really skilled trainers. They will often tell you how to use your arms to improve your balance in certain techniques. Like I can prove that I really don't need my arms. I'm not using them because yeah, I tried it, and I can just like put them in my pocket and I can still do everything, and because I had to learn without using them anyway. As you can see, it works fine without them. It's only that when I lose my balance, then of course I need my arms. I throw them in the air and I try to save myself before I fall and hurt myself. But other than that, I mean, I can use it maybe to be look more professional, because professional skaters, they have their hands on their back anyway. So I thought maybe if I do all those kind of funny techniques and turns, then I don't look very professional. But if I can put my hands on my back, I look like a pro skater at the same time. So nobody would think that I'm a beginner because I got my hands on my back. So that's also a very nice advantage of not having to use my arms. Anyway, that's just a joke, of course. I just wanted to show off my skills, of course. You can guess. So once you learn the backwards toe roll, then you can actually start making it a bit more complicated, both for the toe roll, but also for the forwards to backwards transition that you need for doing the power slide, because you want to be lower in the end to be able to do a very low slide. That means that you also have to practice the backwards toe roll in a lower position, and then the toe roll becomes a bit less stable, so you still have to kind of learn that skill as well. But also I've been doing a lot of leg training, so you can actually see how the increase of your muscle strength is helping you to go lower into the backwards toe roll before having to do the sliding. So you can gradually increase your or decrease your height, increase your skill level in the backwards toe roll. And then eventually you can immediately start doing the sliding. It's not really a big change to go from backwards toe roll to a real power slide. And then, because you don't have this uncertainty anymore of am I going low enough to be able to get into a slide, you can just fully focus on doing that transition of the backwards rolling foot, and going lower and lower, and also faster, but I think lower is more important, because faster is kind of like the same thing, but you have to get used to the speed. It's just a little bit more tricky to balance yourself at higher speed, but the motion, the transition is basically the same. So I think it's important, for me I focus more on going lower than going faster. It's also a bit safer. But you really notice how your skills are limited by your muscle strength, and that motivated me to do more exercises, like leg lunges, dropping down into a pistol squat, trying to get up on one leg, and then also doing leg lunges where I push one foot backwards like a power slide and drag it back in when I go up, and that really helped my muscle strength to gain and to be more comfortable doing backwards toe roll in a lower position. So eventually you can gradually increase your skill level without any slide. I didn't really buy any new wheels when I started doing this. Still doing everything on my original 125mm wheels that came with my skates. And I'm getting more and more comfortable, especially with turning around that foot backwards. It's kind of getting into my muscle memory. You don't really have to think much about it anymore, and I can focus more on the sliding leg and getting that angle right. So I think that's the way to go for me. I wish I would have known this earlier, but at least I can tell other people that for me this worked a lot better than all the other ways that I tried. And with that, I've come to the end of how I came to learn the jump entry into the power slide. I hope it helps other people also to learn it, maybe easier than the way I learned it. So yeah, and otherwise I hope in any case you enjoyed watching the video. I tried to make a little bit of fun as well, and show my progress, of course. The next episode, as I mentioned, I will discuss the way that I learned how to do the lunge turn entry into the power slide, which is maybe one of the more popular ways of doing the power slide, and was also more difficult for me to learn. I wish I could make all episodes in one day and just push them out and not delaying it because of any other reason that I just don't have time. I already recorded everything I need. I just need to find the time to edit things and make this presentation and then put things together again. So I hope you can wait for that. In any case, I hope it won't take too long. And then I wish you a very happy 2024, in case you watch this at the beginning of 2024. And then next time maybe I don't have all the fireworks in the background like this time, and it would be a bit more quiet. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next video. Bye!